Hey everyone, I'm joined today with Chris Ferguson. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, no real complaints.
Good, good. Glad to hear it. We got a few stories to cover today. Before we
Okay.
jump in, we're going to be covering over the New York Times and Washington Post's coverage of GamerGate. But before that, we got a couple light items. First of which is Kukuruyo has been banned on Twitter/X. How do you feel about this?
What now? See, I didn't. I did all my homework, but you didn't mention that. So what happened with two?
All
Tell me
right,
the 30-second version.
all right. So he tweets out here. Yep, it's definitive. Twitter suspends my account permanently for making a your
Okay.
mom joke, quote unquote, to a harasser. Appeal concludes that I was committing abuse. There goes a decade of building up my artist account because a right winger was triggered by a trans flag. Now, according to Kukuruyo, he's had this trans flag in his avatar, his Twitter bio for a long time. He's not trans himself, but he puts it in there because it pisses people off. Uh,
Yeah.
and I guess it succeeded in pissing somebody off. So someone tweeted at him, and he says in response, "No, it's true. I did bang your mom." And then he
Oh,
gets banned for this permanently from Twitter. He's
all right, that's
filed
so.
over 50 appeals, according to him. He's filed,
Yeah.
and all of them have been rejected. He's now locked out of his account due to 2FA, two-factor authentication reasons. So
Okay.
yeah, what do you think of
That
this?
is weird. Yeah. So first off, I want to say I feel like my service to your podcast is for all your listeners who don't know what you're referring to when you say something. So I'm playing the straight man here and going, oh, well, gee, Tachyon, what are you referring to? That's my service here. Yeah. No, this sounds. I mean, that sounds really stupid. I mean, obviously, it's obviously a joke. It's something that a zillion people have said in jest over decades, and if that's the reason for him being banned from Twitter, I mean, I thought Twitter was supposed to be all like everybody's welcome now, and there's no censorship, and is that all just gone away again?
Apparently, if you're a Hugo Award nominated artist, they don't care. They
Okay.
just ban you.
Well, I don't think there's any risk. I think I could probably still make your mom jokes then, because I don't think there's any risk that I'm going to become a Hugo nominated artist anytime soon. So, your mom.
There we go.
There
All
we
right,
go.
your mom, Elon Musk's mom. There we go.
Yeah.
He might ban you for that. He's a petty guy. All right,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Um,
all right.
I love the spaceships, though. How about that? There we go. So, spaceships
Yeah,
are
I do.
cool.
I do like spaceships. Spaceships are cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about the trailer for Alien Romulus a few episodes ago, but now we're going to be
Mhm.
talking about the movie itself. What are your first impressions?
I liked it. I enjoyed it. I mean, I don't think it was like it broke like a ton of new ground necessarily or anything. I thought it was fine. I think I enjoyed it more as I was watching it than when I left and thought about it a little bit. But it like I said, it was a cookie cutter, but good cookie cutter Alien franchise movie. I didn't think it was terribly thoughtful or anything, but if you wanted to see, a bunch of good-looking young people run away from spiders, it was the perfect movie for that. So
Yeah,
basically, it was cool. It was neat them bringing back. I forget the actor's name, but the dead actor who they brought back and actually
who played
was
Ash? Yeah,
yeah, played Ash. That was kind of cool in a way. And no, I thought it was fine. I thought it was fine. I don't think it wasn't kind of like Prometheus or oh shit, what was the other one? Covenant. Do I have that right?
unfortunately,
Um,
yes.
yeah. Well, see, I like Prometheus. I mean, Covenant was okay too, but even though Prometheus had like gaping plot holes in it, I still liked it for like the lore and the philosophy and all that. It was a deeper movie in some ways, even though I could name plot holes from Prometheus better than I could for Romulus, for instance. Um, but I like that sort of depth to those movies, whereas Romulus didn't particularly add anything new to the franchise in terms of depth or anything of that sort. But it was good. It was fine. It was good. It was if
Yeah,
you're looking for an alien, if you're looking for an alien movie, it's an alien movie. Yeah.
yeah, I'm okay with Prometheus. Like I don't like it necessarily, but I'm okay with it. I put like a C tier. But like
Yeah,
Covenant, I despise. I feel like all of the characters were just fucking retards, and they didn't do
yeah,
anything at all with the Prometheus story that they built up to it. The idea was that they were supposed to go visit the home world of the engineers, right? And then they ended up just killing them all off, and then like, oh okay,
yeah.
yeah,
They
it's.
did. They did do that. Yeah,
I
that was absolutely true. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I had some. I mean, and I also didn't. I mean, one thing I didn't like about Covenant as well, in fairness, is I didn't like how they had. Yeah, they ended Prometheus with the idea that what's her name, Naomi. Oh God, I can't.
Shaw
I'm
or
terrible with names anyway. So yeah, I thought they kind of like suggested that she was going to be a big part
mhm.
of that yeah, Covenant basically, and then of course they just sort of like killed her off screen, and that was I wasn't blown away by that. I actually wrote a review of Romulus, but as I've well established on your podcast, my memory is terrible. So I'm now like looking back at my review and trying to see if I had any particular, you know, oh, I mean, there were certain things I'm trying to think of. Like I think the whole Alien franchise kind of relies on the Weyland Yutani Corporation being as stupid as possible. Like the whole idea that they have of like finding this alien life form and trying to somehow turn it into profits. I mean, they go through literal generations of waste trying to get this thing to turn a profit, and it's remarkable that I mean, you think about like all the like Alien 1 through 3 at least, and now Romulus. I can't remember if 4 also involved Weyland Yutani. And just the gazillions of dollars adjusted for inflation that they must have tossed at trying to get this one critter to turn it into some sort of vague profit thing. Any normal company at some point would have been like, "Fuck this." This is just not working out at some point. So there definitely was some like suspension of belief, in this sort of stuff. But and I thought like everybody kind of talked about like Ryan like there's a plot twist, there's a big twist at the end, and I'm not going to reveal what it was, but I thought it was like so obvious. Like you can see a telegraph like a gazillion miles away. Like, oh yeah, this thing is going to happen, and sure enough, the thing happened. But yeah, but that's me just like trying to find things to complain about. Overall, I like Romulus. It was good.
Yeah, I did a whole like hour and a half long discussion about the film, so like we could be here all night. Just with this, but no, I'll say that I really enjoyed the film. If you want my full thoughts on this, you can see the stream I did, but I'd give it like an S tier. So there we go.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got the New York Times up first. So the New York Times has written at least 6 articles to my knowledge about GamerGate, 2 of which I'm covering in my book. In the media coverage Tachyon's taken one of the volumes eventually at
Okay.
some point. But I'm also covering this 4-part series they did in 2019 called Everything is Gamergate. I'll be showing this on the screen now. So
Yeah.
turn my cam off while I do
Oh,
that real quick. All right, so on my
I didn't
screen,
realize Sarah.
God,
Didn't realize Sarah Young wrote one of the articles actually.
yeah, she did. So this is a 4-part series by the New York Times. It's one big web. They modified their whole website for this, very special. Unfortunately, they don't really talk about Gamergate at all in the article, which is somewhat annoying as someone who had to go through it to try and talk about it from a Gamergate perspective when they don't talk about it really. So you have articles
Yeah.
from Charlie Warzel about the history of Gamergate, supposedly. An article
Yeah.
from Brianna Wu about the lessons from Gamergate. You've got an
Yeah.
article from Joan Donovan about the precursors of Gamergate, supposedly, and hey, Sarah Jung profile of Zoe Quinn about the tactics of Gamergate. So first
Yeah.
impressions. What you've read the article, I assume.
Yep. Hmm.
Uh,
I did my homework on this in this case. Yes. I
Okay.
know at this point you have to ask.
All right. All right. So what are your first impressions from this bad boy here?
Well, I mean, so I mean, the one that I think well, first off, I'm also like just hypnotized by this little thing they've got in the background where wherever you move your little mouse cursor, like all these other mouse cursors like follow it around like mosquitoes, and so I celebrate that aspect of these these articles. It's just a little game they have going on in the background is like stupidly mesmerizing. I don't know why they did that. It's also very distracting from the actual articles. But yeah, the one that I think really struck me. I mean, they're all very 2019, right? But the one that really struck me was the first one. It was the Warzel article, which I'm trying to think of a way of describing it. I mean, it really read like like a news reporter in Poland would in like August 30th, 1939. Like like this like really apocalyptic kind of narrative about Gamergate that like we're about to be invaded by the Nazis and it all started with Gamergate, kind of thing. It really had this tone of breathless, just panic. It's really like a panic piece, basically. It was really like I don't think they would write this today. I mean, do you? I mean, I think, like I said, I think all the articles had this like very 2019 feel to. I don't even think Brianna Wu would write something like this.
So
I don't know. Maybe she would. I don't know.
So it is. You say 2019. Obviously, people are going to be reading this 100 years from now, 50 years from now, 20 years from now. They're going to be like, "What do you mean by that?" I think what you're getting at, and correct me if I'm. Why don't you just tell me what you're getting at when you say 2019?
So I mean, there was this period. Yeah. So for all of the ancient or all of the future historians that are listening to this podcast 100 years from now, there was this period, roughly somewhere. People debate when it started. It probably began somewhere around 2014 and is kind of ending like now. Where news media and particularly kind of left-leaning news media, like the New York Times, just kind of wrote about identity and culture war things with this kind of breathless, panicking, apocalyptic tone, and everything was about race and gender and sex, and just this idea, in the same way that like the people on the right are like they're coming for our guns and our God, it's like they're coming for our gender identity, and they're going to institute fascism and this like panic tone about how everybody's bad on the other side and everything's an 11, nothing's ever a 3. Everything's an absolute emergency and everything ties together in this like big, mesh of conspiracies. And if only we hadn't, if only we paid more attention to Gamergate in 20, you know, 14, then we wouldn't have had, Trump elected and, I don't know, what, yeah, all these like fever dreams about everything being interconnected and somehow, there's like an apocalyptic nightmare on the horizon. And it was a very, very common writing style. And I think it peaked around 2019, certainly 2020, and into maybe like 2021, 2022, of just this like everything's an impending disaster. And it's all because of this like widespread racism, sexism, transphobia. We're on the verge of fascism, and it's all interconnected. And then kind of people just kind of came to their senses in like 2023 and like, oh well, yeah, I guess things really aren't that bad. Just kind of went away.
Nice.
And and so yeah, I mean they have that. This is all written in that tone of like we're on the edge of democracy is on the ballot, right?
Yeah.
We're
Well,
on the edge
that's
of
my line.
disaster. Yeah, oh, and it
Yeah.
started with Gamergate.
Yeah. It didn't
It's the
start with
video
GamerGate
games
though. Yeah.
that did it.
So I do want to. We have a lot of. I wrote down a lot of stuff. So I'll just quickly go through some of the key points that I wanted to highlight here and get your
Yeah,
views on. So first off, it's not really especially GamerGate related necessarily, but they do talk about the Zoe post in this. But they
yeah,
refer to Joni, Aaron Joni, the gentleman who wrote the post, as a quote angry 20-something ex-boyfriend. They don't use his name at all. This is actually very
yeah,
common for most of these articles about Gamergate or the Zoe post. They don't talk about, they don't name him. They just refer to him as like an angry or jilted boyfriend. It seems like a very
yeah.
negative, kind of biased framing of it towards that gentleman. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I've heard a lot about that situation, and I don't know that I've ever actually read his post. In fairness, yeah. But he's like one of these guys. Like I always kind of wonder, like what the hell happened to him? Like, what is he doing today? You know, kind of thing. Because
Well,
yeah, it seems like he is like the center of this, you know, origin story of GamerGate, and you know, he and his situation with Quinn, and it's sort of like that guy at like Google. I think he came up in one of the articles too. The
James Damore.
dude who yeah, I always wonder what hell happened to him too. Like, yeah, there are these people that are kind of like at the center of some of these things, and they get talked about in these breathless kind of ways. It's like, you know, like they're Mengele or something like that, right? You know, and it's just some. Yeah, I mean, I guess he probably was pissed off. I mean, I guess it's, you know, and maybe posting about it on you know, social media wasn't the wisest thing. I'm sort of open to that. But you know, did that start like the Trump phenomenon? I don't know. You know,
Yeah. So,
so
um,
yeah,
so yeah, it just seems like they throw that in there almost to, like, to bias the reader against this guy. It seems
yeah.
to
I
make
mean,
him
yeah. I
portray
mean,
him as
it's part of the
unsympathetic.
narrative, obviously. Yeah,
So
yeah,
they refer to his post as a 9,425 word screed.
agreed.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
but
remember
then
that.
they
Yeah,
don't actually describe anything that was really in it. They just say documents the last weeks of his breakup with game designer Zoe
yeah,
Quinn, and punctuated with screenshots of their private correspondence. Like, that's
yeah,
it. So apparently 9,000 words. That's all they got from the whole thing. I don't think they read it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, yeah, I mean, again, with the private correspondence thing, I mean, people do this all the time. Is the reality is you have to be careful what you put in an email. You know, I've been on the receiving end of that. You know, sometimes, and a lot of people have been. And yeah, I mean, on one hand, you can say like, yeah, it's kind of rude, you know, to do that. But on the other hand, it happens, and nothing prevents anybody from doing it. You know,
Yeah.
they're not illegal.
Yeah,
You know,
I
so
generally I don't try to leak things. I think there are circumstances in which leaking things can be okay. In this
yeah,
particular
I
case,
agree.
he was using it as evidence that she was manipulating him, and lying
Mm,
to him. Basically, that's what he was using it as evidence for. So I feel like that's
mhm.
fine, because you are making, like, basically a post about the situation and providing evidence. I think that that's okay in that particular context.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But it is, yeah. I mean, it was all this I mean, it's obviously they're writing things from a particular narrative. You know, and journalists do this all the time. You know, and then they just kind of frame things in a way that sort of supports the pre-existing, you know, narrative around this stuff. I'm sure he was a pissed off dude. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
and you know, and women do this too. I mean, you know, people sometimes are pissed off when their exes, you know, things don't work out for one reason or another, and they get pissed. And you know, the advice we give people, right, is to write it in on a piece of paper, you know, like a letter, and then crumple it up and throw it in the trash or the fire, right? But unfortunately, sometimes people post it on social media instead, you know. And I think it was just one of those situations, that you know, again, maybe unwisely he put it on social media, but it, you know, at the center may not have been necessarily terribly different from a Taylor Swift song, you know, because she does that sort of thing too, you know, a little bit. And but it just happened to be on this topic, or related in some ways to this topic, that it, you know, got a lot of attention, um, in ways that maybe ended up not being super constructive. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what happened, you know, to Zoe Quinn was of course regrettable, you know, and such, but again, like I said, I don't consider myself a historian of Gamergate. I know people have a lot of passionate opinions about like who did what to whom at what time and in what order, and I'm not going to try to even remotely adjudicate any of that. But you know, my concern is just taking that dispute and whether one or both of them did things that may be regrettable, as happens sometimes between young people in relationships, and then taking that and say, well, this applies to like modern politics, you know, and this is like Trump versus Harris somehow apply, you know, that this is informs us of what was happening in the larger world, and with the idea that if only this thing had not happened, we'd somehow be living in a much more utopian society where everything is working out just fine. And I'm very skeptical of that.
All right, we got a lot more to get to. I should point out, though, Aaron Joni says that he was never reached out to for comment by the New York Times. All
That doesn't
right.
surprise me. I don't. Yeah, that's not a shock. I mean, I think the other ones are kind of funny because, you know, it's the other things about, you know, 2019 is of course that they end up having an article that has to do with race, they just have to throw that in there somewhere. Everything had to be about race at some point. And to be clear, I think we should all get along. Nobody should be racist. Being racist sucks. But this idea that every conflict everybody has anywhere, anytime on the planet, eventually comes down to U.S. racial, issues, was very 2019. And then Sarah Young was interesting,
Well, we're gonna get to
because
all
I
of
don't
them.
know.
Don't worry. I got a whole
Okay,
thing
my
set
bad,
up.
my bad.
Okay,
You
all right.
sound like you were moving on to other things. Okay,
Well, we're
let's
moving
go
on
back.
to more of the. I'm still in Warzel. All right, so Charlie Warzel characterizes the Nathan Grayson and Zoe Quinn affair. I'm kind of plagiarizing myself here, but it's my own work, so it's fine. As being a quote conspiracy theory unquote. And he starts the article. You notice this little bit of a sleight of hand. He says coverage at the first
Mm-hmm.
coverage. Yeah, Quinn slept with gaming journalists in return for good coverage. He writes, but then he later changes it later in the same paragraph to review.
Oh,
It didn't matter that the writer in question had never reviewed her game. Isn't that
gotcha.
interesting?
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Subtle. You're good to pick up on that because I didn't pick up on that necessarily. I'm a bit more of a forest than trees person, but I know I don't know if you've heard of like Jesse Singal, but he's really good at this stuff too. Sometimes looking at how journalists word things, sometimes are like you're kind of suggesting, or a little bit sneaky sometimes about how they word things that obviously I didn't pick up on what you're picking up on, and probably most people don't
Yeah.
necessarily because again it sort of like tells a particular story maybe that isn't always exactly accurate, but does so in a way that technically everything the person is saying is true, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if the concern,
Yeah,
as Warzel says, was about coverage,
yeah,
and not necessarily, he also frames it too as that she was sleeping for positive coverage, as if like the onus was on her. When I
yeah.
guess really the onus is on Grayson as the journalist.
Right,
Yeah.
sure,
But he frames it that way too, which is very interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
So then he also says, hang on one second here.
I'm just reading along with it
Okay.
too here.
Warzel then proceeds to imply that Vivian James was, quote, deployed with the same darkly ironic winking nods as the alt-right's Pepe the Frog, and states that
Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
that's one of those 2019 things.
Yeah,
So, and he also
it all
says
comes
that
back to Pepe the Frog at some point.
selected screenshots from the Burgers and Fries chat room on Rise and IRC showed, quote, their anonymous plots to terrorize women, unquote. And he provides evidence of this by linking to a Ars Technica article that links to tweets from Zoe Quinn showing selected chat messages from the Burgers and Fries chat room. So
Okay.
yeah, he's trying to he's linking to basically, I guess, indirectly to Quinn's tweets of select screenshots from the Burgers and Fries IRC chat room.
All right.
Which are you familiar with the Burgers and Fries chat room? Have any thoughts on that?
We've talked about it before, and I don't know why. I'm just like my brain just refuses to get burgers and fries into my into a permanent storage place. And I know you told me what it was before, but here I'm playing the straight man again. So I know exactly what it is, but for your listeners, could you briefly remind your listeners what burgers and fries is?
Okay, Burgers and Fries was an IRC chat room on Rise and IRC. It still exists to this day. It still has active people. I don't know how active they are, but it still has people in it. At its height, I think it had like 150 people, according to the owner, Thydrin, who I've interviewed. The chat logs of this, for most of its history, possibly to this day, I'm not sure if they still keep the logs or not, are publicly available. So nothing really too shocking in here. There were, I think, at least two instances of people engaging in or supporting harassment in the chat room out of the
Yeah.
150 people from against Zoe Quinn. One of them was the other gentleman, I believe the name was. He posted saying that he hopes that Zoe Quinn unalives herself. That's not really harassment since it's a private chat room that Quinn presumably isn't a member of. So I don't know if
Did
I'd
they
call that
use that?
harassment, but it's shitty behavior. He shouldn't have said that. It's inappropriate.
Yeah, sure.
It's
But
uncouth.
okay, did they use unalive back then? I mean, this is like
I don't know if
2013,
he said
right?
unalive or something else, but I think it
Yeah, I
was.
think that's more
I
of a
think he used
recent.
something other than unalive, but I'm using unalive for YouTube, so we'll just use unalive.
I don't know why that word like really bothers me. I understand people are using it to get, and I
Well,
don't. The people
YouTube
using it to get that.
YouTube has certain. You use that word, and YouTube makes a
Yeah,
big
I
deal
know,
out
I
of
know,
it. So yeah.
I know why people. But why doesn't YouTube just figure out that unalive means the same thing at this point? Like, why are they so slow?
The same reason you can say that you can kill someone in Minecraft, and that's okay on YouTube. But if you say you'll kill them in real life, then YouTube has a problem.
Yeah.
All
Oh,
right,
and
so
there's Damore. Okay, I knew he came up. So you see my memory. I'm like, didn't one of these articles mention James Damore? Here he is. Here I see him
all
now.
right, all right.
Yeah, there he
So
is.
he, I, I believe he categorizes this as a leak. Let me double check that.
Mm. It's interesting to me too that I mean
Yeah,
he's
but it's not a
referring to
leak. It's
four.
public logs. So it's like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me. He spends a lot of time talking about like 4chan and 8chan, and I think he gets in. Or again, I'm mixing it up with the Washington Post one. But I know they get into this idea of like these are websites that do a lot of pranks, right? Or like sometimes very vicious ones. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they can be mean spirited shit. But a lot of them are like scams and pranks and that kind of stuff. And he never seems to like put it together that maybe some of the stuff really was just bullshit, like just trolls, I don't know, what I'm getting at there? Like, there's still a sort of sense of like, and we talked about this before, like, this is like the gaming community that somehow is bad, as opposed to 4chan/8chan pranking people in a mean-spirited kind of way, but not in a way that they themselves took seriously, you know.
well, there are, yeah, there are. Well, there were trolls obviously who did fuck with people on both sides, and some of them come from like 4chan
Sure.
or something awful. Like these communities did have people on them who were sometimes trolls, no doubt about it.
Yeah,
But obviously, that's not like everyone there or everyone involved with GamerGate, obviously.
yeah,
And then a lot of the trolls actually end up going after people like us too. But anyway, okay,
yeah.
we got a whole lot more to go through. I don't. Oh shoot, man, I'm not. All right, let's just go ahead. Boom. Charlie Orzel ends his article with saying GamerGate is occasionally framed as a battle for the soul of the internet between a diverse progressive set and an angry collection of white males who feel displaced.
The good
Uh,
guys versus the bad guys.
well,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
exactly.
It all
That's
comes down to that, doesn't it?
exactly.
The rebellion versus the empire.
Yeah. I wrote here
Yeah,
that
I mean
he
that
frames it. I wrote here that Warzel frames it this way without any evidence and without regard for the GamerGate community that actually existed and was composed of men, women, and trans people of various races, ethnicities, backgrounds, and political affiliations.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the good guys versus the bad guys. And that was a very, like I said, it's 2019. That was the 2019 framing, that everything had to be the angry, usually the white angry dudes who like Trump versus everybody else, right? Who somehow we're still, even though theoretically that sounds like a lot of people, we're still somehow the marginalized group, right? So it was always this very Manichaean good versus evil sort of framing that somehow, fortunately, we've all somehow gotten tired of. That's good. But back then, that was what they did. The New York Times, the Washington Post, all of them.
Then we have Brianna Wu's article. She doesn't really talk about GamerGate really at all in the article. Anything you want to say about Brianna Wu's article before we move on?
No, I mean the thing I think that hers is really a little weird. Yeah, weird looking. But I mean, I think it's interesting. That's yeah, and I agree. It's kind of she's talking about even like her run for House of Representatives and all that kind of stuff. So and she just was in the Free Press, Barry Weiss's thing, which is fine, but it annoyed me because they made this reference to like she was being targeted by right wingers and now she's being targeted by left wingers, but it was referring to Gamergate. I was like, no, data, they're not all right wingers. They're not even on average right wingers. Stop saying this. So I was a little bit disappointed to see the Free Press kind of repeat that mythological narrative about Gamergate. But on the other hand, I mean, I find Brianna Wu pretty interesting because it seems like in the last couple of years she's sort of found sanity. And if I see her sometimes on Twitter, or I was seeing her on Twitter. I eventually figured out that you can switch from the for you to the follow tab, and that cleans up your feed a lot. So I'll probably never see Brianna Wu again. I don't follow her. So, but her stuff was has been like in the last couple of years has been surprisingly sane. Not talking about Gamergate, but talking about other culture war stuff. She's still progressive, but oftentimes takes on some of the progressive ideologies in ways I would think were pretty courageous, including on like trans issues and and that sort of stuff. So unlike I think a lot of the figures in this area, she seems to have changed her perspective at least somewhat. Although
Well,
she still seems locked into this idea that the Gamergate was a right wing phenomenon, but
yeah,
whatever.
so I also am disappointed in the Free Press and Barry Weiss's coverage of Gamergate in this particular episode. I wrote a letter to the editor just a couple days ago, and I sent it in, so
Yeah.
hopefully that gets published. Um, in the Free Press interview, Barry Weiss refers to Gamergate as quote alt right unquote, which obviously isn't
Yeah.
true. We've covered that in past episodes, and then also. She says that Gamergate, Barry Weiss says, and Brianna agrees with her, that Gamergate is, quote, that Trump was the Gamergate candidate, rather. Trump was the Gamergate candidate, is what Barry Weiss says, and Brianna Wu agreed with that, even though she knows that that's not true. So it's
Yeah.
very interesting. What do you?
Yeah. Well, I'd written to them too. Not a full letter, but I just whatever their editorial email was. I just briefly sent them a hey, just thought you should know, kind of email of like here's the actual data. You said this in the headline and in the article, and here's some actual data. Just thought you'd be curious. And as far as I know, they haven't changed anything. So they wrote back very nicely saying, "Oh yeah, well we'll send this right to our producers," and I'm sure you'll get as much of a response as I did. Just
They did
thank you for your
reply.
letter.
They did reply and told me to write a letter. So that's what they told me. So that's what I
Okay.
did.
They didn't even tell me to write a letter. Yeah, they
Yeah.
just did nothing. They just said, "Oh yeah, we'll send it to the producers, and they'll put it in the same pile as all the other stuff that is inconvenient
All right. So we got
for us."
Brianna Wu's article that we're skipping. Basically, has nothing's in it. Interesting.
Yep.
Gamergate related. And then we have Joan Donovan wrote the third article in the set, the
Hmm.
precursors of Gamergate. This is the race one. They say first they came for the black feminists. Basically, Gamergate's not mentioned at all in the entire article, except for very briefly. Donovan says what trolls learned in 2013 became foundational for Gamergate, in which communities of feminists were targeted for harassment not just online but also in their homes and jobs. That's the only thing she says about Gamergate in the whole article, and doesn't
Yeah.
offer any evidence of this. Just says it. All right,
Well,
so
it's like I said, it's just this was obligatory in 2019 that if you were going to write, and people have made fun of a lot of press around the, and particularly like NPR, but also the New York Times and stuff of like you'd be talking about like oh yeah, and they've analyzed the dust on the moon for its mineral components, and here's what that means for race in the United States, kind of a thing, and like everything you know, they found a new sunspot on the sun, and here's what that means for race in the United States. Water is wet, and here's how that relates to oppression. In the United States. It was like everything eventually had to come back to like race and identity. And so I think this is again just a twitch or a kind of automatic response from the 2019-2020 moment that you just were obligated to write somewhere in here about how this impacted race, about something. So very vacuous, but you just you weren't allowed to write unless you also said something about race. That reflected poorly on the United States. You couldn't say it was all good. Still there with me, or did we lose you, or did
oh,
you lose
sorry, I
me?
was muted. I was muted. Sorry. So the fourth article is a profile of Zoe Quinn by Sarah Zhang, uh, on the quote unquote tactics of Gamergate. Uh, she opens up the article with what started that night would eventually be called Gamergate. Its catalyst was a blog post written by an ex boyfriend accusing her of sexual promiscuity. Within days, nude photos of her were circulating on the internet, alongside commentary and speculation about her weight, looks, and her genitalia. Now, I can't comment on like if anybody on the internet speculated on her weight, looks, and genitalia. There's millions of people on the internet. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did that. But she does say too. She does say that nude photos circulated, but this isn't quite accurate. Like the way that if you read that, you'd think like, oh, they got leaked out by Aaron or somebody. But when the reality
Yeah.
is that these were already public photos that she uploaded online when she was an adult model. These were already
Mhm.
well-known photographs, so not something that can be blamed on any one particular individual or leaked out.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and she also Aaron didn't accuse her of sexual promiscuity. Accused her of cheating on him, which is
Mm,
different, but framing it that way makes it seem like it's like a slut shaming campaign. It seems it's kind of biasing
gotcha.
the
Yeah.
reader.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
So, and the interesting thing about the reason I said, oh, I didn't realize Sierra Jean wrote that. She actually got into some trouble, um,
She had some
which people
spicy
might
race
remember.
takes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So she had on Twitter, or always on Twitter, had posted a number of things that were written about white people that, if you had written them about black people, would absolutely be considered racist. And then of course that created one of these other culture war things where, of course, some people, accused her of being racist, and others, kind of came to her defense and saying, well, as long as it basically said, as long as she's picking on white people, it doesn't matter. You kind of this, you can't be racist towards white people thing. I don't, it's another one of these Demore characters. I don't think she works for the New York Times anymore, does she? I mean, I think she eventually
Oh, I have no idea.
left. I don't know under what circumstances. So I don't know. I don't think it was related to that, but I think that scenario, which broke right when she started with the New York Times, which was about like, it was probably about this time, about like 2018, 2019. I know it was pre-COVID at least. I think kind of spoiled her tenure with the New York Times to some extent, because she was always kind of under this cloud of saying racial things that, unless you really buy into this idea that you can say whatever the hell you want about white men, um, and nobody else, anybody otherwise would have thought what she was writing was pretty racist, so I don't know that her tenure there ever escaped that cloud, but I'm sure she's, somewhere doing well,
All right.
I don't, but yeah.
So, all right. So we've got the New York Times, this fourth article here, Sarah Jung's article. They actually offer evidence of what they say was harassment. Okay. So here we go. I've actually gone through all these tweets. So the first one's from Count Dracula NES. Now this user actually, I don't think I'm going to screen. Well, maybe I will screen share it.
Oh, there she,
I did a
there.
lot of Count Dracula. It's number 6 on here.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
put
give me two
it's the
seconds.
the live squirrel, dead squirrel one there. The
All right, so I actually went through. So this is actually a Bill Wagner crew person. They're a doxing and harassment group, not affiliated with GamerGate. They actually went after GamerGate people too. But as you can see, it looks like they have several Bill Wagner crew. Oh, I'll link this to you so you can see it too. Several Bill Wagner crew related tweets. So this is a group of people that wasn't affiliated with GamerGate that went after GamerGate people and anti-GamerGate people both, including me. They actually
yeah,
doxed me, which was fun. Um, Yeah. So this is the first account, not a GamerGate account. Doesn't seem.
and better you than me, I'll add.
Next up, we've got another account here.
Network Jesus, is that the one?
Network Jesus. Yeah. Let's see. All right. So this account here just seems to be. Let's see. What did I write in the book about it? All right. Very little evidence of this account's Twitter presence. I can only find one archive of their Twitter feed. I don't think they had any GamerGate stuff on here. No, they didn't. They did actually share a picture though, which we'll have to edit out in the video.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, yeah, but yeah. So there's that. But no, it doesn't appear to be a GamerGate account. Then we've got Op Blitzfag and Sanic Boom as the other accounts. And
Us
these,
up Blitzkrieg, you mean?
well,
Blitzkrieg?
Blitzfag is the username. Blitzkrieg is
Oh,
the,
I see it down. I see.
yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
So these accounts too didn't have any archives. I don't think of them in the Wayback Machine or archive.is. And then the other account, L Masturbate, this egg account here.
Jesus Christ.
No archives exist of that too, but that's evidence that they supposedly proved. But so you've seen these 5 accounts here. Um, Obviously, we don't know every single thing that the person behind these accounts or people behind these accounts believed in necessarily. But would you think it's fair to categorize for the New York Times to categorize these as being GamerGate accounts?
I mean, they look kind of random. I don't know. I mean, I don't see anything one way or the other that, but and I'm gonna pick on something really pedantic here. I'm really sorry. I'm gonna like waste like 3 minutes and say, like the Op Blitzkrieg or Op Blitzfag or whatever that one is supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be threatening because he talks about a 0.55 m reaching her cranium. And I'm not like a super firearms expert, but I don't think there is such a thing as a 0.55 millimeter bullet. I mean, I think that's what he's trying to make it sound like. I'm not really unless it's some other reference that
I don't think
I'm
there is one
missing.
either. There's a yeah 7.5, but I know 5
Yeah,
point
I'm,
point
like,
five
I'm
five.
not
Yeah,
sure what this guy's referring to here. I mean, I guess it's 0.55 meter, which would be a big bullet.
that's like a cannon. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think these are like kind of random idiots is what I would, I think, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with here. I mean, I think that, obviously part of what happened simply is that Quinn and Sarkeesian and some of the other people also just ended up in the public view, in ways that, most of us, I mean, you get doxxed, but I haven't ever dealt with anything like that, but nobody knows who the hell I am, also. And I think to some extent, if you end up in the public view, you just kind of get some of this shit, and whether you're male or female, and in whatever context. So, I mean, I think they saw these things, and I'm sure that they were unpleasant. I don't doubt that whatsoever. But I think probably, like anybody, like Trump or Taylor Swift or you know what I mean, like anybody in the public view gets bullshit like this. Just that those people have people that filter the stuff out, so they never actually see it.
Yeah.
So I think this is just, unfortunately, they're just trolls and crazy people and all kinds of other stuff that are out there. And if you end up being even mildly famous, you're going to see some of this stuff until you get rich enough to hire a person whose job it becomes to see the stuff for you
Yeah.
and delete
Now,
it before it ever gets to you.
one
So
one final thing on the New York Times coverage that I want to add is that they do talk about in Sarah Jung's article. They link to Jung writes that Quinn received and obtained a restraining order against Era and Joni,
yeah,
but she links to this Eugene Volokh article in the Washington Post, and the article is actually defending Joni. um,
yeah,
so,
okay,
like, did she
yeah,
not read the article? Because Eugene
yeah,
Volokh, who she's citing, seemed to think that the restraining order was bullshit, or at least that Joni was having his First Amendment rights violated.
right,
But she doesn't talk about that in her article at all. It's entirely, I guess, framed from that one perspective.
right, yeah, yeah, and yeah, she gets into yeah, she starts talking about like Charles Murray's The Bell Curve and Tucker Carlson. Yeah, so it ends up with this whole big thing. I'm guessing I'm trying to remember now. She's referring maybe to her own controversy a little bit in there, somewhat, if I'm remembering the context, correctly. And then there's a whole like Christina Blasey Ford. Yeah, it's just like the essay just wanders around
Well,
all
GamerGate is
over the place.
everything. That's what they say, right?
Yeah, it's just somehow. And again, for your listeners who don't remember, Christina Blasey Ford was the woman the psychologist who accused what was his name, the Supreme Court justice there
Kavanaugh,
of
yeah.
raping her. Yeah, Kavanaugh. Thank you. So it's a pretty wide for a not very long essay. It's a pretty wide ranging essay. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these essays in general, particularly Zhang's and maybe Donovan's and Wu's, the latter three, in all ways seem very personal, and I mean that not as a compliment necessarily. You know what I mean? Like it's really grievance writing about their own issues rather than anything that's really useful in informing the public about GamerGate in any way. And I'm not saying there's no room for that sort of thing. I mean, I'm sure. I'd love to write a grievance article sometime about everybody I think wronged me, and have that be taken seriously. I've got my list ready. I'm coming for you. uh,
All right.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think. I mean, they just. I mean, the first article at least like had the pretense of being like an information article, even though it was not very informative. But the rest were just like I don't know. I think they were just personal gripes about one thing or another. So I don't think they added much to the conversation. New York Times really could have spared themselves a lot of effort, money, and space by I don't know sticking to one article first off and having it written better than it was by Warzel.
Now, one thing
I,
that's obvious to us at least, and anyone who knows about GamerGate, I guess, is that not all of these articles only represent one perspective. The pro
oh,
GamerGate
they do.
side,
Yeah.
there's not a
Oh, yeah.
single one in here among them,
Yeah. Yeah.
or even a neutral voice. What do you think of that?
No, they're absolutely true. I mean, these are definitely all in clear alignment with each other. I mean, the only extent that they're not in clear alignment with each other is again the sort of sense of the latter three in particular all kind of hitting their own particular grievance. Whether that's no, it's really about race. Or no, it's really about my own cancellation. This kind of stuff. So. They may be personal axes to grind, but yeah, no, there's not in any not the slightest dissenting voice in any of these articles that would give people anything to chew on about the idea that there could possibly be two different perspectives, on this. And I think that the Wu, Zhang, whatever, Sarkeesian perspective, certainly should be represented, in fairness, but I don't think it should be the only side that is represented in fair. I mean, literally, I'm gonna tell you, the best thing about this set of articles is this little game you play in the background where you just move your cursor around. And all
Yeah,
these little arrows follow it around. I'm doing it now. I mean, the whole
yeah,
time we've been
me too.
talking, I've been doing this thing in the background.
All right, so
Seriously, your listeners have got to try this. It's cool. It's actually like stupidly fun to do this thing. And
so
don't read the actual articles. They're terrible. But the little game that's going on in the background is
all right,
fun.
so I do want to ask here now. You're obviously one of the top researchers on GamerGate. You've published a study, the only empirical study that's been published and peer reviewed in a respectable journal, no less, about
Yeah.
GamerGate. One, are these articles an accurate or fair representation of GamerGate in your view? And two, are these articles ethical in your view, or do they mislead the public?
Well, yeah, I mean, they definitely don't represent, an unbiased coverage of the truth. Like I said, I don't consider myself a historian of Gamergate, but even just in the very basic, factual data of whether the median Gamergate supporter was on the political right or political left, they, unabashedly get that wrong, and don't seem to be the slightest bit curious, about that. And that seems again to still be the trend. And and that's kind of like the curious thing about like the free press is that's a paper I would say they probably would describe themselves as centrist, I'm guessing. Yeah, and maybe others would think they'd lean a little bit right or whatever. But even in that outlet. They still got it wrong, and and apparently even when you and I and maybe others are writing in to try to tell them that they're wrong, as far as I know, they haven't corrected it. So don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Definitely seems to be at play here. Journalism ethics are of course different from research ethics, and so it's hard for me to speak directly to that. But certainly it's misinforming the public. I mean, it's just not true. So there's no question that it's misinforming. Whether journalism has any obligation to be neutral and present both sides and be honest. I would like to think that should be an ethics of it, but on the other hand, we know this is very, very common in journalism. And in fairness on both sides. Where there's a narrative and journalists, just simply find whatever they can to support that narrative. And certainly as scholars, I mean, a lot of academics will tell you that they know that journalists just run through the Rolodex. They want a specific quote from a scholar, and they'll just run through the Rolodex of scholars that they have until they find the one that gives them the quote that they want, kind of thing. And that's the only one that ever makes it into an article or a TV show or anything of that sort. So this sort of behavior is nothing new. It's very, very common in journalism, and that's a warning. It reminds us of how we should be a bit skeptical of. I mean, this is the quote unquote paper of record, right? This is the New York Times. It's the best newspaper in the world, basically, and they're getting basic facts wrong and don't seem to care. and that should be scary, right? And the reason why this is important too is you and I are talking about this because we know about Gamergate. You're more of a historian than I am about this stuff, and there's a word, there's a name for it, but it's a particular kind of what is it? Amnesia. They refer. It's not real amnesia, but the idea is that you and I will recognize this, right? We'll see an article about Gamergate, like in the Free Press or the New York Times, and we go, "Oh my God, yeah, they got this wrong in very basic ways. Like this is just factually untrue." And we know that, right? Because we actually know the data, we know the information. And then we flip the page, and then they're talking about COVID or Ukraine or some other thing, and we just believe them because we don't know anything about those topics, right? We assume they've gone back to telling us the 100% truth, and the reality is probably everything that shows up in news media is substantially flawed. In the same way that things that we actually know stuff about, we can recognize those flaws. Probably most of the other stuff is also pretty flawed, as well. Like I said, I mean, the in 2019, 2020, everything had to be about race. And the one thing that always kind of annoys me a little bit is reading anything about the weather. Of course, as you know, in Florida, we've had a few hurricanes. We had one come right through our area. And it just, after a while, like, they always have to mention, human contributions to climate change, and that sort of stuff. And like, I get it. I don't disbelieve that. I mean, I'm on board. I'm on your side. I believe this is a contributing factor, but I don't need to hear about it every damn article. You know what I mean? It's like again, like a Twitch or something like that. Like they just have to write it every single damn time. I just want to know what the wind speeds are going to be that I'm going to have to survive. I don't want to get lectured again about coal. So it's just that kind of stuff. I mean, I think there are a lot of problems in journalism, and maybe things are a little bit better in 2024 than they were in 2021 or 2020 or 2019. But I think there's still a lot of problems.
All right. Now, before we move on to the Washington Post article and then the harassment section, we have a lot to get to. I do want to ask. So we agree these articles are factually inaccurate, and they present a one-sided narrative. Does the New York Times need to print a retraction and probably revisit the story from a more neutral perspective and include
I'd
multiple
love to see them.
perspectives?
I'd love to see them revisit it. I don't know what the standards in journalism are for retracting an article. And I think probably, yeah, if they had said something about a person that was like libelously untrue, then a retraction probably would be at play. I don't know. These things are, again, I'm going to keep picking on the Free Press because it's just the most recent one. I mean, I think they probably should change their headline. I mean, I don't think they have to retract it, but they should do a correction of some sort, or at least some kind of nod of like, well, some of the data, they should do something, and I think that, I mean, a lot of these articles are really just essays. I mean, they really are just opinion pieces. The four that we've been talking about really are just
They are
opinion
opinion pieces.
pieces.
Yeah, these ones are.
Yeah. I mean, so and I think opinion pieces get a fair amount more leeway about for bullshit, obviously than a news piece would get. I mean, the War Zell one is but it does say he is an opinion writer at large, so still gets a lot of a leeway there. But I think like basic facts being misrepresented is where they should at least be corrected. I think.
Okay.
And that's again, it's just like in research. Like if we make a mistake, then we ethically should try to correct it, right? And people sometimes can have different opinions about whether something is a mistake or not. But I mean, if you say this was, a creation of the alt right, and there's data to suggest that it was not, then that's just a basic mistake, and it's just if you have other data to suggest otherwise, then that's interesting, but you don't. Nobody does. we know nobody does. There is nothing that supports the other, this sort of alt right narrative.
Yeah, I agree.
So
There's
you
no
know,
evidence at all.
yeah.
All right, so we're moving on to the Washington Post. This is also an opinion piece, and not the only one they wrote about Gamergate, but this is what they call, quote, the only guide to Gamergate you'll ever
Yeah.
need to read by Caitlin Dewey, October 14, 2014. All right, any initial thoughts on this article here?
Yeah, I mean to some extent this is I think being eclipsed a little bit by the New York Times one for me in memory, but it really was like just this, if you kind of think of the narrative from 2014 that sort of emerged out of games journalism and into mainstream journalism. I mean, this was just this is like the stereotypical. Yeah, if you were going to stereotype journalism and how it covered Gamergate, this is the stereotype. It's just like, again, good versus evil. Here's everything you need to know. Don't question anything. Don't have another opinion. It's all guys are bad, gamers are bad. I think, yeah, Adam Baldwin shows up in here somewhere. I don't know why. It's all, I think Milo Yiannopoulos. It's all this sort of stuff about, and it's quite outdated, right? Because yeah, I remember yeah, here it is. She writes about like the FBI is investigating, and now we know the outcome of that FBI investigation, which was kind of like it's like oh, they could only really identify a couple guys that were responsible for most of or at least a large percentage of the harassment that occurred. So it didn't seem to be this like sweeping cultural thing that was happening across gaming or gamers, as opposed to it being a handful of probably pretty disturbed individuals that were spent a lot of time harassing Sarkeesian and Quinn and some other people. But so it's old, it's outdated. It was written in 2014. It is very much the narrative. So if you want to see an article that really sums up what people in the press were saying about Gamergate in 2014, this is the prototype. This is the model for the narrative, quote unquote, in 2014.
All right. So Dewey describes Gamergate in part as a quote misdirected lynch mob unquote, and she says that Gamergate drove Brianna Wu from her home, which is not true. But like even if you would just take that story as being well, even if we take the story of her leaving her home as being accurate, they cite the Daily Dot article, which references the Cheddar Whiteman tweet, the Death to Brianna Wu Twitter account,
Mm-hmm.
and so that Twitter account, one, we don't know who was behind it, right? It could have been anybody. It
Right.
was this throwaway sock puppet account. So there's no evidence tying it to Gamergate. And then two other aspects of Wu's story are questionable to say the least regarding this particular incident. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, in fairness, didn't and I'm trying to remember like Sarkeesian also did say she got. I guess saying like driven from your home makes it sound like people showed up with like torches and pitchforks, and I don't think that was the case for any of these women. But I remember Sarkeesian saying that she felt like she had to leave her home because she had been
yeah,
doxxed, and
yeah.
it
Maybe
was
maybe
basically tied.
Sarkeesian did. I don't know about her story specifically in that regard.
Yeah.
But
Just to be fair.
but the Wu thing
Yeah.
in particular, the Chatter Whiteman threat, that there's no
Yeah.
evidence tying that to Gamergate.
I like this term, but I mean, you mentioned it, the misdirected lynch mob. Is there such a thing as a properly directed lynch mob? Is that like a thing?
Well, it depends on who you ask, right?
Like, oh, it's a lynch mob, but they're going in the right direction at least.
All right, so
We're okay with this lynch
Caitlin
mob.
immediately frames it as good guys and bad guys, like you say.
Oh yeah,
She says,
yeah.
"What is GamerGate? Whatever GamerGate may have started as, it is now a culture war. On one side are independent game makers and critics, many of them women, who advocate for greater inclusion in gaming. On the other side are of the equation are a motley alliance of vitriolic naysayers, misogynists, anti-feminists, trolls, people convinced they're being manipulated by a left-leaning and/or corrupt press, and traditionalists who just don't want their games to change." So, what do you think of this framing right here by Dewey?
Yeah, it's very Manichaean. Obviously, we got once again we get the good guys. It's the rebellion versus the alliance, or the empire, right? Once again, sort of thing. Alliance was the word she used. I'm sorry. And it's very Manichaean. The good guys and bad guys. Here's the side you're supposed to be on. Here's definitely the side you don't want to be on. And I think it's interesting about like the traditionalists who don't want their games to change, and like how badly that prediction. Because I mean, I think even like what the hell is that game? Oh, Jesus Christ, my memory is just so terrible. But there was with Ellie, right? The zombie shooter game. What
Last
the
of
hell
Us.
is that? Last of Us was that was 2013, wasn't it? That was yeah. lead female character, very, very popular, who was gay, by the way. Um, and then, and more recently, like what, 2018, 2019, we have Assassin's Creed, the one that took place in Greece with the female character, I think was much more popular than the male character you could choose to play. So I mean, I think we've seen that like gamers like women. You know what I mean? Like it just has to be a good game is the only thing. Yeah, and sure they're dicks. I mean, nobody's going to say that there are no assholes in the gaming community. But again, there's sort of this framing that everybody who had any concerns about games journalism were evil anti-feminist trolls, misogynists, that kind of stuff. Is just the least charitable interpretation of what was going on there. And again, we could kind of say like people, both sides had good people, had bad people. And some of the GamerGate supporters were women, which is important to point out, as well. And they were attacked, just like everybody else was, on that side. And then we get into the whole, the stereotypical gamer, I actually the young nerdy white guy who likes guns and boobs, as if like I don't know, is that a bad thing?
It's also not really a conservative thing to like guns and boobs, especially in video games. I mean, what the fuck? Uh, yeah,
It's
but
kind of
it's
how
it's
like
obviously
human
ridiculous framing.
appropriation works, I mean, maybe not the guns part, but certainly anyway.
Yeah, I'm a left winger who likes
Um,
guns.
yeah,
Uh,
no, I mean, yeah, I'm just saying it has nothing to do with
I know I'm
hopefully
a
with
play.
appropriation.
So anyway, so first off, she completely glosses over ethics in journalism at all, which is what Gamergate was about. She tries to approach it from this culture war framing. I don't necessarily think that writing about Gamergate from a culture war lens, looking at it from that angle, is necessarily wrong. I think that maybe theoretically
Yeah,
there could be some sort of interesting perspective that you might see or something you might miss if you don't look at it from that angle. I don't think that that's fundamentally what Gamergate was about. Gamergate was involved with the culture war, but it wasn't the culture war. It was like an
yeah.
aspect kind of that got thrown on, it got attached to it later on, um, due to articles like this in part. So
Mhm.
I do want to point out though too. I did make a quick 13 point, I think it is, 14 point thing to try and help explain how things got so mixed up with people considering, I guess people like Dewey
Yeah,
considering Gamergate to be the culture war, quote unquote. So part
yeah.
one, let me know what you think of this because this is going to be in the book unless I change my mind on this now. Um, Here is sort of a very basic outline of how things started to become conflated. One, Gamergate is about ethics in games journalism. Two, games journalism is an industry that leans socially progressive. Three, games journalists are criticized by Gamergate supporters. Four, games journalists respond to criticism with accusations of bigotry and harassment. Five, Feminist Frequency makes videos criticizing video games from a feminist perspective. Six, Anita Sarkeesian's speaking event is threatened. Sarkeesian says that she believes Gamergate was behind it. 7. It is widely reported that Gamergate was behind the threat, though the identity of the perpetrator remains unknown. 8. Critics of Gamergate conflate Gamergate with a more generalized anti-SJW sentiment in gaming. 9. Some progressive gaming activists advocate for censorship, making disputed claims about the impact of video games on real-life attitudes. 10. Many Gamergate supporters are in favor of free speech and artistic freedom. This is a key branching point because many Gamergate supporters viewed these viewpoints as being separate from their Gamergate views, which they saw as being about ethics in games journalism. Other Gamergate supporters saw standing up against censorship and supporting artistic freedom as being a core part of Gamergate's values as a movement. There was an internal dispute within the movement. I don't yet know which of these camps was the majority. I'm still collating data on that. 11. Many of the same progressive activists say that Gamergate is a harassment campaign. 12. Gamergate supporters do hold anti-censorship views, who do hold anti-censorship views, naturally have disagreements with many progressive activists, as many of them supported censorship. 13.
Mhm.
Some people disagree with progressive activists in gaming about a wide array of other topics, and for a wide array of reasons. 14. This is a key distinguishing point. Not everyone who criticizes progressive activists in gaming is a Gamergate supporter. A lot of people are having disagreements on a wide array of topics with online progressive activists at the time. Many Gamergate supporters were themselves progressives. It was a large tent that encompassed considerable political diversity. So there's those 14 points sort of illustrate to any extent to you why this kind of got conflated with the culture war stuff, or am I off
Yeah.
base?
No, I think I was just going to pick on you. Like say, like I have this really brief 109 point primer on GamerGate. No, I'm just teasing you. But no, I think it was no. I think you're on point. I mean, I think it absolutely is true. And it is interesting. I mean, the language she uses in this article, like she really does make this point. So because she kind of says like if you're not a gamer, you may not kind of give a shit, basically. But then she kind of makes this argument. This is really, I think the way she puts it, this is a battle for our cultural soul. Basically, that's her quote. From this article. I mean, that's something. That's a big claim. But yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. This is complicated, right? There are lots of different people with lots of different opinions on both sides of this thing. They weren't like one. It keeps getting presented as this like unibrow, neckbeard, white dude, kind of thing. But the reality is that GamerGate supporters and GamerGate critics were a wide range of individuals in terms of their identities and their politics and everything else and their concerns. Yeah, and I think it's okay to say that it really was just about games, and it didn't necessarily mean anything, for this like idea of it being a battle for our cultural show. I mean, it did tap into things like censorship and whatever, which matters in a broader context, as you were saying. But yeah, it's just written. Yeah, this article is just written so breathlessly that it's 10 years later, it's kind of hard to take it very seriously, honestly. But yeah, I don't know.
Okay, and then she tries to paint GamerGate as right wing. She says, she says the thing about the nerdy white guys who like boobs and guns, blah blah blah, whatever. And then she
Yeah.
says there are unsurprisingly some socio-political overtones as well. The hashtag only took off once it was tweeted out by conservative actor Adam Baldwin and blurbed on Breitbart. Truly odd, fast. And then she blah blah blah, whatever. And then she says. SJW is a shorthand insult for liberals and progressives. It's not an apolitical consumer movement. John Stone argued on The Guardian on Monday. It's a swelling of vicious right-wing sentiment. So first off, obviously it's false that the hashtag only blew off after Adam Baldwin tweeted out. Well, yeah, he was the first person to use the hashtag in relation to anything like this, at least. So like, it's kind of a weird to
How
frame it
many,
that way when obviously, like, if he's the first person to use the hashtag, of course it's gonna
how
blow up.
many how many people know who the hell Adam Baldwin is, other than
He was in
presumably
Firefly.
Alex Baldwin's brother?
He was
What
in
was he
Firefly.
in?
Firefly.
How many people have seen Firefly? I mean, I know what Firefly. Like,
Not as
what
many. It
percentage of
should.
the planet has seen Firefly? I mean, I'm not trying to diss Firefly here. Don't get me wrong. I know Firefly has a really dedicated audience, and that's great. I'm sure it's a great show. I've never seen it, but I mean, it's not Obama, right? I mean, like if you go on the street and say, "Hey, what's the best TV show or movie you've seen Adam Baldwin in?" And people will say Saturday Night Live, and they'll be like, no, not Alex Baldwin, the other guy. They'll start like Daniel Baldwin, Adam Baldwin. They won't know who the hell they're talking about.
Well, and
But
then
my point being is that Adam Baldwin is not a powerhouse of cultural, currents. Not a shot against him. He's much more powerful than I am, which is not saying anything. But this idea that like, ooh, Adam Baldwin tweeted this out, and that it became like Trump got elected, is silly. I
what she
mean, yeah,
also tries to make it seem like the GamerGate stuff was like unknown until Milo's article and it was like September 3rd or whatever,
yeah,
which is like obviously not true.
yeah. Right. No, I think Milo just capitalized on that. Yeah, I think he was an opportunist. And yeah, this was already happening, right? And then it just looked, I think, for him like a way to make a bunch of money by trolling, which is
September
which was
1st, but yeah,
his career. Yeah. So I
days
mean,
later.
yeah, and I've had that conversation with a couple of people too, and they bring up Milo and who the hell is the other guy, Cernovich or something like that.
He was only
Um,
involved for like a few weeks maybe. I don't. He was only
yeah,
very lightly
yeah.
involved with the GamerGate stuff. The Cernovich guy was.
Yeah, that's what I kind of try to tell. They were latecomers and they were opportunists, and you'll see that. And yeah, I don't think they were very constructive. I mean, I'm again, I sort of agree with that, but I don't think they defined the movement. They just tried to grift off of it.
Yeah, basically, I agree. Now they
Yeah.
also she quotes John Stone from the Guardian claiming that GamerGate is not apolitical. It is a vicious right-wing sentiment, is what he refers to it as, swelling of vicious right-wing sentiment. Now, obviously, you did the research on this. I've done research on this. Obviously, it's not true. No one involved with GamerGate seems to think it's true.
Well,
Essentially,
but if the Guardian said it, I mean, come on,
yeah.
we'd argue against the Guardian because the Guardian is in no way, shape, or form, engaged in a fever dream about right wing authoritarianism. I don't know how familiar you are with the Guardian. They're like the UK's, NPR in terms of like their political leanings. But yeah, no, I'm not surprised at all. The Guardian would say something like that.
All right, all right. So then, of course, they refer to those white men. Obviously, we know that's not true either. You've done research on that as well.
Yeah,
So that's all I took for notes on this because I'm still writing my own Tachyon's take for the media coverage of GamerGate stuff.
yeah.
That'll be in one of the future volumes, not volume one, one of the future volumes. But we do have some more in the article here. Anything else you think is interesting in the article you want to talk about?
No, like I said, it's just this was like you were required to sign on to this, a memo in 2014 if you were in any kind of left space, and I mean like New York Times or Washington Post writing about Gamergate. This was what you were allowed to
Oh
write.
yeah, there is one more thing too. They say that there was no conflict of interest between Grayson and Quinn in here, which is obviously
Oh,
not true
okay.
too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
gotcha.
one of the
Interesting.
men
Yeah,
was one of the men was a writer for the prominent gaming site Kotaku, Gawker Property, while he and Quinn denied the allegations that they somehow traded sex for coverage. Outraged gamers had already taken to Twitter, Reddit, and 4chan by the tens of thousands to protest the so-called ethical breaches in games journalism. Almost 2 months after the fact, Almost 2 months later, in fact, many people will still try to tell you that ethics in games journalism was what GamerGate's about. So she even recognizes that there's a whole other side of this that she didn't even look at or talk about at all, and then she just,
right.
yeah, doesn't even bother trying. Um,
And
and then she says here, meanwhile, the male journalist whose ethics purportedly at the center of the kerfuffle is still writing for Kotaku, which has no bearing, of course, on whether or not he actually did anything wrong. And then also says, which for the
yeah,
record ruled that neither he nor Quinn did anything wrong. No, they quote Stephen Totillo here. This is addressed in Volume 1's Tachyon take on games journalism, by the way. Be sure to pick up Volume 1, support the Kickstarter. And then Nathan, basically, Totillo says that that he investigated it himself and he found no wrongdoing. Uh,
yeah,
Which, like, okay, like he's obviously an interested party in this, and also he's
yeah,
objectively wrong, as is covered throughout this project and throughout Tachyon's Taking Games Journalism Volume One, where I have detailed sources on
yeah.
everything. All right, so any final thoughts on the Washington Post article?
No, does Kotaku still exist? I can't even remember. Are
They
they still
do,
around?
yeah, they do.
Seems like they're laying off people every year. I figured at some point they have to be um they have to be gone. I don't know, but I guess they're still around. So good for them. I used to like Kotaku back like before all this, back in like 2010. I thought they did some good stuff on like violent video game debates and that kind of stuff. So I missed the 2010 Kotaku, but it's been a long time.
All right, so on the article here, Washington Post article, I got a couple questions for you to wrap it up. First of which is the article. Do you think that it's an accurate representation of what GamerGate was? And then two, do you think that they need to do anything to try and correct the record on this or revisit the topic?
It definitely. I mean, obviously, it wasn't true. Again, you get into the sort of it's always kind of tricky with like this is 10 years old at this point, so there's almost a value in something like this being this old of like being able to point back at it and kind of going like, look at the shit they wrote 10 years ago. Yeah, yeah. There's almost like a historical curiosity sort of value to some of this, but I think again, I wouldn't say take down the article, but what I might say is, maybe it could use a note saying, this is what people felt in good faith, perhaps. Nobody has to admit any wrongdoing. But in good faith, this was kind of like the view that emerged out of 2014. With 10 years of hindsight, we can see that things are more complicated, and the data haven't always supported every single claim that was made in this article. So, kind of saying like, take it with a grain of salt. We're going to keep it because it's a historical document at this point. And it's useful to know maybe what was written at this point, but also acknowledge that it should not be taken as factually true. I don't know. I mean, there are two schools of thought of that. I mean, on the other hand, I can also respect the argument that a note, maybe it is ethical that you should change everything that you now know to be false, and update it so that it is correct. I'm not really sure. Um, I mean, I think in like I said, in the research community, I think that that would the leaning would be in that direction. That if you know something is just you made a mistake, you correct the mistake, right? You don't just leave it out there as a historical curiosity. But with something like this, where it's journalism, like I could see the value in it being a historical document, but I think it would require something noting that it is a historical document and should not be taken as gospel truth 10 years down the line, and I don't think that requires them to, admit any fault. They could just say, like, things change, our understanding of things change from one moment to, just like with COVID-19, what people wrote in March of 2020, about like whether masks worked or whatever, was different from what people wrote in August of 2020. The science changed, people had more information. I don't think you have to go back and remove every single article that got things wrong. But I do think you need to update people and let them know what the actual, current thinking or data is on that topic. And I think that's where a lot of this, where really people have not done justice to this issue is like places like the Washington Post and New York Times have not done that.
Yeah.
Where they have done that on other topics.
All right, so we're moving on to the book questions now. Continued book questions interviews. We got 10 questions on harassment to get through in 30 minutes. We can do it, right?
Sure.
All right, number one. Why do you think some people claimed that Gamergate was about harassment or hating women?
That was a better story than saying it was about journalism ethics, right? Who are the ones that mostly did it was journalism were journalists. So if somebody says this issue is all Ferguson's fault, then I'm going to point at someone else and say no, it's all Tachyon Blue's fault. So that's just human nature. The problem is everybody kind of took that narrative and accepted it at face value without recognizing that the people that were creating the narrative had an obvious conflict of interest in creating that narrative. And I think people should have been a little bit more skeptical. It was very much a "this shouldn't happen to dogs," says dogs, kind of situation. And people probably should have been a little bit more savvy in noticing that journalists deflecting blame away from themselves is kind of an inherent conflict of interest, and unfortunately, people didn't do that, and we're still trying to correct the record to some extent on that.
Do you have any thoughts on the studies done on Gamergate and harassment, such as the Women Action Media study, the Newsweek/Brandwatch study, and the Nimbus study?
Um, well, most of those are not, you know, peer reviewed, right? So I think that always tends to limit them to to some extent. I'm trying to frame this in a way of not like patting myself on the back for having the one peer review study we have out there, but I think data is good, but I think and peer review is not a panacea for fixing every problem, because we know there are plenty of peer review studies that are terrible, of course, but I mean, I think different data sources are interesting and can be valuable. I mean, lots of newspapers and magazines do run their own data and data analysis. I actually did one for oh crap, my memory again. Your viewers are used to my memory. What the hell is there's a fairly left leaning magazine. They begin with S. It's not Salon, but Slate. There we go, Slate. I actually did one with Slate one time. And I thought it was pretty good. It was a survey based thing. It was kind of neat, I thought. So these sort of things do happen. But I think it's maybe a little more useful to try to look for studies that have gone through some degree of peer review and see what they say a little bit, if that makes sense.
Okay. What do you think of the Gamergate anti-harassment patrol?
And remind me no, remind your readers who the hell these people are.
These were the Gamergate supporters who used the hashtag, usually Gamergate harassment patrol, the hashtag itself, just that.
Yeah.
And then they would go looking for harassment and report people, confront them, try to get them banned, things
Okay.
like that. if they were engaging in
Well, I mean,
harassment?
I think harassment's bad. I mean, I'm not. I'm going to take my. This is my controversial take of the evening, right? I do not support harassment. So don't dox me, people. So I think there's maybe something to this. I think the risk with a lot of those kind of like quasi vigilante efforts, though, is they usually end up expanding beyond their initial mandate, kind of thing. What was the one that was? This was a more social justice warrior kind of thing, but I remember like again around 2020 there was this kind of like hashtag settler collector kind of thing. It was sort of the same idea as if someone was harassing like a marginalized minority person, then you could call on a white person to come harangue them or something like that. Yeah, I mean harassment's bad. We shouldn't harass each other, but I'm sort of skeptical of these kinds of neo vigilante movements. I think to some extent it's a lot more constructive if you see someone who's going off the rails to try to DM them quietly, talk to them off the side, and say, look, buddy, you're going a little too far with this sort of stuff. I think just getting into someone's face on Twitter just adds to the animosity. It doesn't necessarily detract from it, but so I think their hearts were in a good place. I'm just, I'm not sure that it was ever going to result in an improvement necessarily. But then again, I'm not an online harassment expert, so maybe it did work out.
Uh, do you think most GamerGate people did a good job condemning harassment?
I think if you like talk to normal people that were Gamergate supporters, yeah, I think most of them would have been pretty upfront about not supporting harassment and stuff. So again, I think what happened in this was there was a conflation between sort of online trolls and Gamergate supporters, and people just assumed that the online trolls and the Gamergate supporters were the same people, And again, I'm sure there might have been some degree of overlap, but I don't, I don't get the feeling that the sort of quote unquote real Gamergate movement was dedicated to harassing women. That was more of these sort of trolls that were involved in that. So I mean, you can always look back and say maybe people should have been more vocal or whatever. But I also don't think that, for the most part, people were listening to GamerGate support, like again, so the quote unquote real GamerGate supporters. Nobody's really listening to them or interviewing them or doing anything else. The narrative simply became that there was this harassment, and everybody kind of wanted there to be the harassment. Not in the sense they wanted the women to experience the traumatic events, but they liked the narrative. Like the narrative was sexy, it sold papers and all that kind of stuff. So the sort of nuance of saying, well, hey, what? Maybe some of this harassment is coming from like Chinese bots, or troll farms, or assholes on 8chan, or that kind of stuff, not actual gamers. It was just an inconvenient nuance that nobody wanted to bring up. I think that's kind of what happened there.
You don't have to answer or talk about it, but did you experience any harassment during Gamergate from either side or from third-party trolls?
I don't think I was important enough at that point I know of people who did, and I know people who did on both sides, and people I'm friendly with on both sides of it who'd experienced it. So certainly there was harassment going in both directions. At the time, I had very very limited involvement with GamerGate while it was going down, and it really was just watching it. Like I said, at the time I was following Game Politics, like the website www.gamepolitics that covered it pretty neutrally. I think I kind of missed that site, and that's all I did. I didn't really talk about it much or have much to do with it. And as I've told you before, I was probably more on the Wu Sarkeesian side at the time, or at least I bought the narrative then more than I buy it now. And it was not until some years later that Brad and I got involved in this issue, and no, I think I've mostly been ignored, which I guess is better than harassed. I don't know. Some people tell me differently though, so. No, I haven't experienced much harassment over. Occasionally, someone, yeah, if you go on Twitter and you say stuff, people will get mad. But I don't really consider that harassment. Nobody's tried to dox me or get me fired, or as far as I know, off of any of the stuff.
Okay. Why do you think the media largely didn't cover harassment against Gamergate supporters?
Oh, that was inconvenient. That was, you don't cover, you don't do both sides. You have a nice story and you stick with it, and you keep publishing that nice story as long as you can sell papers off of it. Making it sound like there are two sides and that both sides are being bad doesn't sell newspapers as effectively. So the newspapers aren't going to report that. So I just don't think they were interested. It wasn't in their, interest to report it that way.
All right. Do you have any thoughts on Zack Attack?
And to remind your viewers what Zack
All
Attack
right.
is.
Zack Attack was Mombot, the Gamergate supporter Mombot.
No, I don't remember that.
Okay.
No.
Basically, she worked with Rudder House, another Gamergate supporter. Rudder House infiltrated the anti-Gamergate community. He built bridges with them, pretended to be one of their people, and then him and Mombot worked together to try and like put breadcrumbs out there of like a fake docs, basically, um, for Mombot. And Mombot had spread fake DMs of 9Volt, who was an anti-Gamergate guy, pretending that he asked her for feet pictures. She later recanted this a few hours later and apologized. It was kind of a joke, kind of a trolling him thing.
Yeah.
And then like 9Volt wanted revenge, so he worked with a bunch of other anti-Gamergate people, including not Rudderhouse, who was actually pro Gamergate in disguise, and they basically exposed them as trying to dox Mombot with the
Okay.
yeah, and to get
This
revenge for 9Volt.
sounds like a mess. I don't know. I don't know what to think about all that. I mean, I would say, everybody has to do things the way they do things. Whatever. My own personal preference is to try to be above board as much as possible and talk about and discussing these sorts of things. But it sounds like good theater. I don't know that. You know, making yourself into an undercover agent is necessarily the most constructive way of going about things.
It
So,
did work
but
though.
no, like it sounds like it did. It sounds like it did. But I don't know. I think you can. You know, I, I don't know how informative. I think you can find like any group of people, like kindergarten teachers who love kittens. I mean, you could somehow provoke them into bad behavior if you're inclined to do. You know what I mean? Like, people are people, and any group of people, you're going to find some people who are going to make the wrong choice, right? And I don't know how much that means for the value of the larger perspective, if that makes any kind of sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the Crash Override Network Skype leak?
Tons and tons and tons, but I'm going to keep them private. But I'd love to hear what you
What?
have.
What? You're not going to share your thoughts on this? What?
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. Again, this is another thing. I don't know the details on it.
Okay, all right.
So,
Zoe Quinn, she made an organization called the Crash Override Network. Um, but
all
basically,
this inside baseball stuff, I don't
yeah.
know. Like I
So
said, I'm not a historian of all this stuff.
basically, this group of people, it was like Zoe Quinn, Anita Sarkeesian, Randy Harper, I think what's his name is in there, Adam Sessler, a bunch of other people too, Ryu Long, the Wikipedia editor. A bunch of these
Yeah,
people were all in this group chat. Peter Coffin, Ian Miles Chung, and so them and a bunch of others were in this group chat for their Crash Override network. And then in this group chat, though, someone leaked the logs. I know who it was, but they don't want to go public. And then like four people in the group confirmed it was legit. The logs were legit. But basically, in the in the logs, they show that Randy Harper was like doxing GamerGate supporters, and
yeah,
by trying to look them up on Facebook and share their information, and then also tried to get Foxygon banned from the kicked out of the military. He was a GamerGate supporter who switched to neutral and then switched back and switched. I don't know. According to them, according to their group chat logs, supposedly he's been switching sides kind of back and forth. I'm not sure where he was at the exact moment, but they didn't like that he was. I guess they didn't like his opinions on GamerGate, so they wanted to get him kicked out of the military, and they tried to, and a bunch of other stuff in there was in there too. It was a huge leak.
it just sounds like everybody needs to dial things back to like a five. You know what I mean? Like all the stuff of like destroying lives and trying to humiliate people publicly. Makes me sad. Whichever side is doing it. That. And that's really, I think, I understand like the harassment of women, is something, we need to make sure it doesn't happen or try to make sure it doesn't happen, but otherwise, I mean, like, unlike these New York Times and Washington Post essays, I mean, the Gamergate in the larger scale of things, GamerGate was like a two, in terms of like issues of societal importance. You know what I mean? And like everybody needs to calm the fuck down to some extent with some of this stuff and just relax. I mean, yeah, yeah, you should, say, we shouldn't harass women, that kind of stuff. Or we should definitely say, games journalists should be transparent and not have conflicts of interest or whatever. But I think once you get, I don't know, I think on any issue, once we got to the point where you're trying to publicly humiliate or destroy the livelihood of another human being, I have difficulty supporting that unless they're like a pedophile or some an actual Nazi, or have some other like incredibly repugnant views or behaviors or something of that sort. So I just wish with a lot of these issues, I think a lot of things would be solved if people could understand that something could be a 4 or a 5, not an 11 every single time that it comes up, and we can disagree and disagree even passionately without needing to absolutely hate each other and try to destroy each other's lives. But hey, you
Absolutely.
know what? Academics can't do that either. So
All right, I got four more questions real quick. We can do it. We got
gotcha.
15 minutes. All right. So, do you have any thoughts on GG Revolt?
And what is GG Revolt?
GG.
I'm probably gonna say the same thing, dude. Actually,
Yeah.
maybe just start the questions with a quick.
Yeah. So
If it's
GG
something
Revolt
inside baseball, is
GG Revolt is a spin-off forum. So GamerGate HQ, from 2015 to basically the rest of GamerGate. GamerGate HQ was the
yeah,
main forum for GamerGate people on HN. But people were also on
yeah,
V also. But some people were unhappy with the moderation of GGHQ. They felt as though the moderators were too strict with the rules and not
yeah,
allowing certain kinds of information that they wanted to be on there. So they made their own spin-off forum called GG Revolt. Um, Opinions on this are mixed to say the least. A lot of people perceive GamerGate Revolt as GG Revolt the board as being more conservative coded, and by conservative I mean like far right. That might not be entirely fair, depending on like what part of its history you look at. But then also too, GG Revolt. Some of the users there were people who had been excluded from other GamerGate communities, like GamerGate HQ, V, and Kotaku in Action, and so um, they didn't. They had like rules like no docs, right? No, you couldn't docs, post docs, but like everything else was fair game, free speech aside from that, right?
yeah,
100% free speech basically. Um, and so some people perceived the GG Revolt people as being bad actors because some of
yeah.
them supported getting Allison Rapp fired from Nintendo,
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Well,
which
I mean,
wasn't supported by the mainstream GamerGate community at all. To be clear, like it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a couple thoughts on that. One of the and this may be the actual controversial thing I'll say, is that I don't think, and of course, like the term far right it doesn't feel like it means anything to me in a way. Like, like, what do you mean? Like, do you mean like actual like Hitler, or do you mean like MAGA supporter? You know what I mean? Like, the term is just it feels a little bit vacuous to me. But what I was gonna say, like, assuming you don't mean like actual like self-described fascist. You know what I mean? Like if you're talking about like MAGA supporters, Trump supporters, there's nothing inherently wrong with being on the far right. And I say this as someone who's not remotely anywhere close or wants to live in the universe of the people that are on the far right. That we kind of treat this as like a bad thing. But if you are like super conservative and you vote for Trump and you wear your MAGA hat, but you otherwise, think other people have free speech rights and have the right to disagree with you, and then I don't necessarily see anything wrong with being quote unquote far right. Again, if you're saying like you literally think the Jews should die, then yes, there's obviously something wrong with that. But assuming we're talking about like Trump supporters here or something like that, then there's nothing inherently wrong with being on the far right. I don't agree with them. I don't want to live in the world they want to live in, but um,
Well,
but on the other hand, like I said, once you get to the point, and I don't know what that woman did that you mentioned that they were trying to get fired. But again,
it's a
assuming that
whole
she
thing.
wasn't,
We can get into it if you want to, but
nah, just down that rabbit hole. And this feels like, my comment would be like, as long as she's not a pedophile
well,
or
that's what they
she
kind of
didn't,
claimed because she wrote like an article in college advocating for like reforming, making it so that people who possess child porn shouldn't be arrested, that possession shouldn't be a crime, or something along those lines. She wrote an article about that, and then
Mhm.
she also was like running like an adult modeling business on the side and promoting that on Twitter, supposedly.
Well, I mean, she can
As
do
an
an adult.
intent,
I mean,
yeah, I don't care what she does. I defended her
I
at the
don't care
time.
about the adult
I defended
modeling.
her
Yeah,
during this
the
project. I defended her throughout. I don't really care. I don't think she should have gotten fired.
if it's adults. I mean, maybe the essay as you describe it doesn't sound super great, but but of course, people write dumb shit when they're in college, and I don't know that if she as an adult was able to say like this was stupid, I was just trying to be provocative or
Hmm.
whatever in this class, then and it doesn't reflect my views today, then I don't think people should be punished eternally for the worst thing they did when they were 19. But on the other hand, if it's just an adult service, then adults can consent, and that's different. I don't know. It would depend on if she was still advocating for this, namby-pambying of child porn. So there's this thing called the Overton window, right? So there is a sense of there are some views that are just so beyond the pale, that they're obscene, legally obscene, or they're beyond defending, and of course one of them tends to be like any kind of support for adult child sexual contact is of course
Well, she
beyond the
didn't.
Overton
Yeah,
window.
she just wanted the child porn to be legal. I think. Not that she like advocated people do it. But I don't. I'd have to
Yeah,
read the
I
whole
mean,
article itself.
I
We'd
can
have
still
to read
see
it.
why that might cause a
Yeah, I
stir.
can. I can see why people might be
Yeah,
upset about that. So we
yeah,
talked very briefly about the burgers and fries stuff. I do want to ask you to. Okay, so let's frame this real quick. So Aaron Joni writes the Zoe post. It gets
yeah.
discussed on various forums. YouTubers talk about it. Social media talk about it. And some people create an IRC chat room called Burgers and Fries, right, on Ryzen, the Ryzen network. And in this chat room, people talk about the situation. They talk about the drama basically as unfolding. Some people are talking about ethics and stuff too. It's like a basically just people
Mm,
talking about the situation that's going on. A couple people in there do end up going too far, perhaps, and say things that like the other gentleman guy. That she should unalive herself. Like that's
yeah,
obviously. I
yeah,
don't.
yeah.
I don't endorse people saying stuff like that. It's not. I don't call it harassment. I don't think. It's just like it's just rude behavior, um, to say that about someone behind their back, I guess. So,
Right.
but
Yeah.
but obviously this is kind of framed as, well, hang on, burgers and fries. That's because of Aaron Joni making the joke in the post about how she slept with five guys. It's sexist to have to name the chat room that, some people say. Though Aaron says he did it because he wanted he didn't make the chat room, but he says he made the joke because he wanted to infidelity shame. He says he supports infidelity shaming, but not slut shaming. And then he later on in an interview with Aaron Pabon of the Games Journalism Network said that he regrets making that joke in the post. He says it's the only thing he regrets in the post. Um,
Mm.
but basically, what do you think of this chat room? Is this chat room harassment? Is it what is it?
Well, I think for me, harassment usually involves direct contact. Things that are directed specifically at a person. I'm sympathetic to the idea that even if something isn't directly targeted towards you, it can be disturbing to read, or or to learn about, even in an indirect way. I sort of get that, but even saying rude things about a person is not illegal, right? Even if it's you know super negative or insulting or humiliating, or whatever else. So I don't know that I see it as harassment. And again, I say that in a way that I don't mean to sound like I'm condoning it either necessarily. That some things can be things that we say, like, are really just like socially negative and not very helpful or constructive. But at the same time, it's not necessarily harassment. Because you think about, again, like public figures, like again, Trump or Harris, and I'm sure there are people that are saying similar things, like I wish Trump would unalive himself, or Harris would unalive herself. And it is rude and it's dickish, and there were examples like when after the I can't believe I have to say this, after the first Trump assassination attempt, there were people that kind of came out, and I knew people in my circle that even would say things like, "Oh,
Yeah,
I
me
wish
too.
that."
I know people who said stuff like that too. I think it's uncouth conduct to say that. I don't think that.
I do too. I
Yeah.
do too. I will say I did not participate in that myself. If I'm being honest, did I? immediately shame them for their no, I
Yeah, I'm
didn't
not
do
gonna
that either.
shame them either. Like whatever. Yeah, but like
It's just
I think that all things considered, I think that they should use better language than that. And you can make the
I agree.
critiques
I
for
agree.
Trump
Yeah.
and beat him at the ballot box. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
All right. So two questions left. One is, what do you think of the term
Yeah,
sea
yeah.
lioning?
Oh God, I hate that term. It's such a stupid thing. And it's one of the, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be hyperbolic. I was gonna say it's one of the stupidest things that ever come out of the internet. I mean, that's obviously, there's probably a lot worse things, but it's such a, like, it's one of these things like you can't win. You know what I mean? Like if you disagree with someone in a rude and obnoxious way, then you get challenged. But if you disagree with someone in a polite way and you ask them for, evidence support for their argument, then you get hit with a sea lion, label. And it's just so stupid. Obviously it's a deflection, that so you don't have to present any actual support for your argument if someone's asking for it. It's really like I guess that's why I say it's one of the dumbest things that's ever been taken seriously by suckers on the internet. And even there's this famous cartoon, right, of the couple that are in a carriage, and the woman says something about how she hates sea lions and wish they were all dead.
Yes.
And then the sea lion pops up and follows them around and keeps asking them for, like, what has a sea lion ever done to you? Why would, do you have any evidence that sea lions are harmful? And I find myself on the sea lion's side. I mean, like, the woman really was actually pretty bad. Like what
Yeah.
she said about, the sea lion's not wrong. Even in the cartoon, that's meant to make it look like sea lioning is bad. So I mean, you should, expect people to ask for evidence, for your arguments, and you should be ready to have it. If you're going to make some sort of declarative, statement about fact. A person politely asking you for data, and maybe even being a little bit insistent about it is not bad. It's how it's supposed to work. And if you're like, oh, I'm not going to do the emotional labor for you. That's just you're just dodging. You're just full of shit. At that point. So I have no respect whatsoever for the sea lioning term. It's like I said, it's one of these things. I mean, even stuff like gaslighting at least is referring to like a real thing, like, that. And I understand it's like grossly overused and is applied in places where it shouldn't be, and this kind of stuff. And or even like mansplaining, like, I think it's grossly overused and is used in ways that are deflecting, but it does still describe like a real thing. I don't know that sea lion even describes a real thing. You know what I mean? That's what I mean about it being like this, one of like the stupidest things that has ever become a meme on the internet. So no, I don't like sea lioning as a term.
All right. All right. Can you define what harassment is?
Oh Jesus. Okay. Probably not in a way that will make everybody happy, necessarily. But I would say, I'm trying to think of something on the fly, without referring to Wikipedia or something like that. But and cheating. I would say harassment is basically a pattern of unwanted contact where the other person makes it clear that they don't want the contact, but you nonetheless persist, despite having some degree of clear indication that the harassment is, or the contact is not wanted. And typically, there's an element of that being some kind of negative, negative contact. Although, this is one of the situations where I'm usually kind of skeptical of, like, the intentions don't matter sort of thing. Um, I think usually intention does matter, but I can see an argument here where sometimes a person may be, particularly in a romantic context, continuing to make contact where their intention is good, but to the extent that they do persist in that, after being told no, that it nonetheless would be harassment, even if their intent is to have a consenting relationship at some future point. But I think in general, I mean, most harassment is negative in context, and persists despite the other person telling you that they don't want any further contact. So it's not just simply disagreeing. It's not even being rude necessarily on the internet. It's just you get in an argument with someone and they tell you, like, I'd like to discontinue this, and for whatever reason you feel the need to keep, like, you find their email, you find their work email, you find their social media information, and you keep trying to you write them letters, this kind of stuff, or you contact their boss, or you contact their friends or their family. That is harassment. And I understand that's not. I just spoke for like 4 minutes, and that's obviously not a definition. But so to try to sum it up into an actual definition, I would say it's a persistent pattern of unwanted contact that continues despite the other person making it clear they don't want further contact.
All
And
right.
and I say that recognizing it's not a perfect definition.
Well, thank you, Chris, for your time. We still have the media coverage, light items, reflections, and closing statements, closing questions. I think we could probably wrap that up in one more interview, unless you want to do a
Okay.
couple other topics in the beginning, like we have been doing. It's up to you. We could probably do two interviews if that's the case.
I
Um,
could do it either way. I'm excited to talk about these light items. I want to know this
there's
this
only
hasn't
three
all
for
been light
neutrals.
topics. This wasn't all like light, dinner table conversation that
well, well, I do.
talking about child pornography and harassment. So you wouldn't bring that up at like the Thanksgiving dinner
I do
table?
not know. Um, though I do want to ask you one final question before you go, and that's Halloween 2024 is coming up. Got any plans? Anything you want to share?
Yeah.
Anything spooky for us?
Halloween is one of my favorite holidays. Halloween and Christmas, my two favorites, and it's like my children. It's hard for me to say which one I love the most. I don't actually have one child, so it's pretty easy for me real life. But no, so usually, so I'm teaching that day, so I usually offer my students extra credit to show up in costumes. I know it's like the end of education as we know it, but nonetheless, it's just like 1 point. So I try to get my students to get involved in it. I usually show up with a costume myself that day, and then usually at night, we have a pretty big display in our yard of lights and blow ups and other kinds of creatures. And usually my wife and I dress up. She dresses up as something like pretty and nice, and I'm usually like a plague doctor. And she hands out the candy whereas I try to scare as many of the children as I possibly can. And it's actually pretty awesome because our neighborhood is sort of known for we have a block party for Halloween in our neighborhood, and so our neighborhood has become kind of well known. So the neighborhoods that are around us, some of which are actually quite low income, although our neighborhood is not. So we end up getting, I mean, the average in the last few years has been something like 500 children,
Nice.
per night. So yeah, we do have to spend like over $100 or maybe a couple $100 in candy. So we have enough candy and last year we did run out, so we got to about over 500 pieces of candy and ran out and had to shut down. And there still were kids who are going around, so it's a big deal in our neighborhood.
Nice. That's awesome,
It's
man.
a lot of fun.
I'm a big
And
big
then usually we
Halloween
watch a
fan.
scary movie after that. Yeah. So yeah, what do you do?
Well, this year, I'm not really sure just yet. I might be going to my parents and passing out candy
Yeah,
too. They have a lot of kids in their neighborhood too that get candy. But
yeah,
immediately after that, I'm flying to New York City, and I'm going to
that is scary.
I'm going to the United Nations building. I'm going to see the Statue of Liberty, and I'm spending
Okay.
Halloween, I guess the day after Halloween, really, at New York. E. Zhang. We talked about her before. I met her through the course of the
Yeah.
project. She's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Um, but she's actually hosting a gumbo. Her organization is hosting a party, so I'm going to that.
Hey,
And then
cool.
Saturday, I'm not sure what I'm going to do at New York City just yet. So we talked about getting breakfast, and then I don't know after that. So any New York City ideas? Any recommendations? The Hayden
If
Planetarium
you
sounds fun, but
if you want something that's sort of Halloween themed, you can take a day trip. Just take a train down to Philadelphia. And there they have, I'm trying to think of the name of it now, but they have basically a museum there about medical oddities. So it's all kinds of skeletons and like dead babies in bottles and
I
all
don't.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about
No, it's
that.
fascinating.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's fascinating. So you go down there and you spend a couple hours. It's got like all the skeletons of people that like the bones all fused together, or there's usually like a dwarf and then like one of the tallest people that's like 8 feet tall, and it talks about all their medical problems and different other medical specimens and all that. So if you're into that kind of macabre sort of thing, it's pretty cool. And then you can go see Liberty Bell, right?
Well, this is my first time going to New York City my whole life, so I probably will spend it there to be honest. But
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, no,
See a
I
play.
really look forward to it. It's my first time going, and so I think it'll be really fun.
Yeah. Check
Uh,
out check out a play. Those are always fun. And then Central Park's neat just to walk
yes,
through.
Central Park would be really good to
Yeah.
check out too. Yeah. All right. Well, hey,
Yeah.
do you have your D&D?
Yes, yeah, I
Okay.
do.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about
So,
that.
are you okay with doing in the next one? If we're going to do like two or three more instead of just one more, um,
Yeah,
do you want to do like another article or two? Um,
yeah. Why not?
oh, okay, cool. I'll try and think of something. I'm not sure if I'll do like the New Yorker or ABC's
Yeah,
garbage 7 minute video. I'm not sure if you saw that, uh, or what. But well, I think it's important to try and I have you, one of the top researchers
yeah,
on this topic, for better or well, one of the only published researchers on this topic. So I want to
yeah.
try and get as much as I can in regards to try and fixing the narrative on this if I can. I feel like one of the
That's
areas I
good.
regret doing in the beginning is I wasn't more specific in my critiques of the project.
Okay,
So try to make up for that a
gotcha.
little bit. All right. Well, hey,
Fair
have fun
enough.
at D&D. Happy
Sounds
Halloween.
good. All right. Thanks again. I always have fun.